It's currently past midnight and I can't really sleep. So I thought that I'd make a quick video on a favorite topic of mine, animated mobile nav bars with React and Framer Motion and Tailwind CSS. Okay, so why are we really talking about this topic and why am I making this video? I have seen too many use state nav bars that kind of just pop into place and sort of pop out of place when you close out of them. And I feel like we can make nav bars a lot better if we just used a little bit of animation. And thankfully for us, there's a framework out there called Framer Motion. If you're not familiar with Framer Motion, it is a React animation library that just makes animations a lot easier to work with compared to GSAP or anim.js. Now, I don't want to get into too much detail as to why Framer is way better to work with than GSAP or anim.js. So just take my word for it that like if you are a React developer and you want to add animations to your project, Framer Motion is sort of the best way to do that. Now we're also going to be using Tailwind CSS today just because Tailwind is a great framework and I feel like a lot of people are using that anyways for their projects. So it would be beneficial to show you how to build a mobile navbar using both Framer Motion and Tailwind CSS. That's good enough for an introduction. Let's go ahead and get into the code. All right, so I have my desktop here. Let's open up a terminal and let's just create a blank Vite project. Now, I'm going to be using Vite, but you can use Next.js or Astro or whatever framework. So as long as it runs React and can compile Tailwind CSS. All right, let's cd into the desktop and then let's run our initial command. So that's going to be npm init Vite at latest. And it's going to ask us for a name. I'm just going to call this animated framer navbar. Let's select React and then let's select TypeScript. And then we are going to cd into our newly created project. And then let's open this up in VS Code before we install our packages. Okay, so in VS Code, let's open the terminal and then we will install our npm packages for the project. All right, so now that our packages are installed, we're going to go ahead and install a few additional packages for Framer Motion and Tailwind CSS. So let's run npm install. We'll get Framer Motion into our project, and then we'll also get Tailwind CSS and auto prefixer as well. And then once those are installed, we're going to run the Tailwind initializer script. So we'll wait for that. There we go. So we're going to run npx tailwind css init, and then we'll include a -p here for post css to get it generated. Cool. So now Tailwind CSS is in our project almost. We still need to do additional configurations. Let's go ahead and pop into our source folder, and then let's create a new CSS file for Tailwind called tailwind.css. So in here, we're going to import our three base directives for Tailwind. So that's going to be at Tailwind base, at Tailwind components, and at Tailwind utilities. Go ahead and save that file. Let's do a little bit of cleanup as well. Well, actually, before we do that, let's actually just import that Tailwind CSS file. So import tailwind.css. Save that. And then let's go into our tailwind config.js and let's just add the contents of our Vite project to the content key here. So that's going to be /source star.tsx. That's going to select every single TypeScript file in our project. All right, let's go ahead and run the dev server and just make sure that Tailwind is actually working. So, the following dependencies are imported but cannot be resolved. Tailwind CSS. Do we have an import error somewhere here? We do. Okay, this is meant to be /tailwind CSS. All right, clear that out. npm run dev. All right, let's check our dev server. I got to pull it into the view here real quick. But it looks like Tailwind is running. I like to verify by just adding some really crazy text styles. So let's head into app.tsx and let's go ahead and let me make this actually a little bit smaller. There we go. Let's just go to this h1 class name. I don't know, text 5xl, text red 500. Cool. So we have Tailwind up and running. Now, let's actually clean up this project structure a little bit, just kind of simplify it down before we go and build our navbar. So first things first, let's actually delete a few files that we don't need anymore. So we can get rid of assets. We can get rid of our app.css. We can get rid of index.css. And then in our app.tsx file, let's go ahead and delete all of this markup, and then we will just return a div, and then let's just say hello world in that div. Oh, we have some imports up here. Let's get rid of useState as well, and then we'll get rid of these two or these three imports, and then that one as well. Cool. Okay, so now we have just a blank Vite project that we're working with. We can now go on to build the actual mobile nav bar. Okay, let's get started by modifying the markup and just making a very basic site layout. So in app.tsx, let's go ahead and get rid of our hello world div. And instead, let's mock up a very basic layout. So we'll put a body here. And then within our body, we'll have three tags. We'll have a header. And this is where the mobile navbar is going to go. So for now, I'm going to put a comment that just says to do mobile navbar. We'll have a main tag as well, and in our main tag, let's just put an H1 that says main body content, and then we'll have a footer, and then in here we can just say let's put a P tag. We'll just put footer, and let's just give this some quick styling. So in our body tag or in our body element, let's give this a background of stone 950. We'll do a text white, and we'll just save that. Let's also give this a min h screen, and then a flex, and then a flex call. And then what that's going to do, the flex and flex call, is enable us to expand our main so that it goes all the way down to the bottom of the page. So in our main tag, we'll give this a flex call, and then a flex one. And then you can see, so the main content is up here, and it spans all the way down until it hits the footer, and it pushes the footer all the way down to the bottom of the page. Cool. So this is like our very basic website right now. Let's go ahead and actually work on the nav bar now. So again, we're building a mobile animated nav bar. So I'm going to go ahead and go into a mobile view here. Let me clean up Arc a little bit. And then we'll use the iPhone 5 SE as our sort of base, our base phone model here. Okay, so we're currently in app.tsx, and we have this to-do flag in our header, but what we're going to actually do is import a new component. We'll make a new component entirely that will be our mobile navbar. So let's head out into the file explorer, and then we'll create a new folder called components. And then in components, let's create another file called navbar.tsx. All right, this is where we're going to start using framer motion and start actually building the mobile navbar. So let's actually, let's just get into it. So the first thing we'll do is we'll import motion from framer motion. So this motion import is actually a JSX element, and you'll see how it works in a bit, but essentially it allows us to interface with the motion. It allows us to interface with framer motion's animation APIs, and it's a really cool component. It's also very complex. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. All right, let's go ahead with the default export here. So we'll go export default function navbar. We don't need any props for this navbar, and then we will just return, for now, let's just return a fragment that says navbar, and then let's go ahead and implement that into our app.tsx component. So let's get rid of this to-do flag here, and then we can just type navbar and then hit enter, and VS Code will automatically import that component for us. And boom, we have a navbar up there now. Cool. Let's go ahead and actually build this out a little bit. So back in our navbar component, let's actually go ahead and mark this up the way a navbar would be marked up, sorry. So we'll go with nav, and then in here we will give this a class of sticky top 0 inset x of 0, and then let's give it a height of 64 pixels, so that would be h16, and then we'll give it a background color too of stone 900, just a little bit lighter so that we can see that nav bar against the background. Cool. So that's going to serve as our sort of container for the navbar. Let's go ahead and also put let's put a div here, and then this is where our button is going to be, our little hamburger button. We'll leave that empty for now. And then one other quick thing that I forgot to do actually. So in our nav tag up here, let's actually add another div right beneath it, and this div is going to contain our container. So we'll put a class name. We'll do container mx auto, and that's just going to make sure that our navbar has a container, so that if we are at a bigger screen size, a bigger mobile device, all of the content within the navbar will be like kind of centered a little bit and not touching the sides of the page. So that's why we want to do this container mx auto in this fashion. Cool. Let's go ahead and build our button out now. So we'll go with we'll do span in here, and then let's give this a class name of W5HPX and then BG white. And that's going to create a line. Oh, sorry. And then we need a block here as well. Forgot about that one. So yeah, so we need W5, HPX, BG white, and block. That's going to create a very basic line here, and that's going to be the basis of our hamburger button. So let's go ahead and copy this guy 2 more times. And then on the button, let's give that a class name of flex call, and then space Y. Let's do 1. Cool. So that's what that would look like. Very basic hamburger button. Let's go ahead and go back into our container div real quick, and then let's just give this a padding of 4. And then let's make this a flex container, and then we'll do items center, and then I'll just make it so that the hamburger button is centered in our nav bar. Oh, sorry. Let's not do HP4. Let's actually do H full. That way our container can take up the full height of our nav bar. And then let's just give this a PX of 4, just so it's not touching the sides like that. Cool. So that is our button done. Let's go ahead and start using Framer Motion to build this navbar out. All right, we're going to start building with Framer Motion now. So I will try my best to explain all the concepts to you that I'm going to be using. It should be fairly straightforward, and you don't have to be a Framer Motion expert to follow along or anything. This is intended for beginners who want to get their hands dirty with the framework. So with that said, let's actually get into it and get started. So at the very top of the file, we have our motion component import. We're going to need to use one more import as well, or actually 2 more imports, but for now, let's import one more function from the Framer Motion library, and that's going to be use cycle, which is a hook that we're going to use in order to toggle between the open and close states of the navbar. So use cycle works very similar to the use state. Basically, it's like, imagine you have a use state, right? And then you have a custom function called like toggle state, and all it does is it just calls set state, and then whatever the state is, it just takes the not of that state. So basically like a toggle function that you can call to just toggle between different values and state. So that's what use cycle is doing for us. So to use a use cycle, what we're going to do is call const, and then we'll do an array and set that to use cycle. Now, unlike state, use cycle actually accepts a list of parameters, and the list is what you cycle through. So in our case, we want false to be the first value because we want our state to start at false. That's going to mean the nav bar is closed. And then the next thing we want to have happen is true. So when the cycle goes to true, that means our nav bar is going to be open. So in our tuple here, we can call mobile nav, or we can destructure mobile nav, and then we can also take out a toggle function called toggle mobile nav. Now, just a quick refresher. If we call toggle mobile nav like this, that will set our cycle to true. And if we call it again later, it'll set the cycle to false. And it'll just keep doing that over and over again as we call that function. And again, it's if you're curious about like the inner workings of use cycle, it's literally just a wrapper for use state. The only reason I'm using it here is because it's a Framer Motion specific API, and it's a good thing to just kind of know about in the framework. But yeah, so we're using use cycle to do the state stuff for us. Cool. Now that we have this toggle mobile nav function, let's go ahead and add that to our button. So we'll do on click, and then toggle mobile nav. That's going to be a callback that we can use to toggle this. The expected type property comes from onClick. Oh, okay, sorry. Let's actually put this in a callback. So we'll do this instead. Cool. So now we have this toggling every time we click on the button. Let's actually make a quick animation and show the button going from a like closed state like this to an open state and actually turn this hamburger icon into an X. So to do that, what we need to do is make use of this motion component up here. So first things first, let's convert our button into a motion button. So to do that, we're going to just put the word motion here and then a dot. And then we have to do the same down here as well for our closing button tag. So what we've done here is we've taken our button component and we've elevated it into a motion component, a motion button component. Now, what does that mean exactly? It just means that we have some extra props that we can call that are framer motion specific that let us do animations with this button as well as its children. So with these framer motion props, you're able to do certain animations and certain timeline things that are, very it can become very complex, but in this case it's going to be very straightforward and very simple. So just to kind of paint a picture, the motion button, what this is going to be doing is sort of define two animation states for us. That's going to be the show animation state when the navbar is opening, and it's going to also do the close state or the hide state when the navbar is actually closed. So to define those two states, we need to check if mobile nav, the variable up here, is true or false. And then we can animate different states depending on that. So to do this, all we need to call in our motion button is the animate prop. Now in the animate prop, we can pass it either a configuration, like a literal inline CSS style, like X500 kind of props to do an actual animation, or we can pass it something called a variant state, which is just a string that lets you sort of namespace your animations, if you will. And that's what we're going to do in this example. So let's get rid of that inline CSS sort of animation. And instead, let's check for mobile nav. And if that's true, then what we want to have happen is the open variant to play. And then if it's not true, then what we want to have happen is the closed variant to play. Now, you might be a little bit confused at this point because where exactly do open and closed get called? They are going to get called in the span children of this button component. So let's go ahead and implement both the open and closed variant states for those span children. So again, we need to convert these into motion spans. So let's select all of the span components. I'm using Command D to do that, by the way. And we'll do motion.span, and then we'll save that. Now, the first motion span is the top bar up here. So to convert this or to animate it, what we're going to do is pass it a variant prop. Now, the difference between the animate prop and the variance prop is that animate will execute an animation and play it immediately once the component mounts. So in this case, when the motion button gets mounted to the page, it's going to immediately invoke the expression within animate. And what that expression is saying, okay, is mobile nav true or is it false? On mount, mobile nav will be false. That's when the page first loads. So the condition is going to go to the closed variant. And so with that variant in place in this parent motion component, what that's going to do for the children is invoke their closed variant. Now, the way we define variants for children is through a variance prop, just like this. And in here, we can define something called closed. And with closed, we just want nothing to happen. We just want the current state as is. So that's going to be rotate 0. Just keep it level, straight, just like it was. Now, on the flip side, when it's open, we actually wanted to play some sort of animation, and that's going to be a rotate of 45 degrees. So it's going to go from a straight line like this to an angle like that. Cool. And we want that to open up 45 degrees in the positive direction. Now, let's copy this variant state, and then let's go down to the last bar in our hamburger button and change this to a minus 45 because we want it to kind of, crisscross like this. So cool. Well, we have that in place now. Let's go ahead and save that and let's run the animation and just see what happens. So let's refresh the page real quick, and then we'll run the animation and see what happens. So Our animation plays, but it's kind of broken, so we need to fix that. And it's actually not that hard to do. It involves some creative trickery to fix this, but let's go ahead and clean this up a little bit. So our middle span, what we want to have happen is remove it from the page. And the way we'll do that is just to change its opacity. So we'll go from opacity of 1 to an opacity of 0 when it's open. And then to change the X's or like the slashes so that they can form an X, all we need to do is add some translation to that. So in the Y direction, when it's open, the first bar is in the closed state, we don't want it to move at all. But in the open state, we want it to move down about 5 pixels. And then down here for the last bar, we want it to move up by -5 pixels. And that's a value that I sort of have just played around with and just kind of like found to work. Again, you need to play around with values and see what will work and what will not work. That's just the way it is with creative web development. Okay, let's go ahead and open up the X now, and then we can see that that forms a perfect X, and now we have a toggleable animated button for our mobile nav bars. So now with that done, let's go ahead and move into actually building the pop out and animate more of that nav bar. Okay, let's actually go ahead and build the nav bar out now. So at the very bottom of our nav component, just before it closes out, let's go ahead and create a let's create another div here, and we'll make this a class. We'll give it a class of fixed inset 0, and let's give it a BG blue of 600, and let's just save that real quick. Yep. So when we do this, we cover the whole page with our mobile navbars background. So and also because it's fixed, right? It's gonna scroll with us if the page is scrollable. Um, so yeah, that's how we can create just a very basic background for the mobile navbar. All right, let's go ahead and add some content into our mobile navbar. So in here, we'll do a UL, and then let's actually wrap that in a div. And then let's do another div real quick. And then we'll do another one as well. So in this middle div, we're gonna make this a divider. So let's do class name of W full BG white, and then we'll do HTX, and then just save that. And then in the div up here, this is where our links are going to be. So let's just do a li and then an a tag, give it an href of a hashtag, and then we'll just say link number 1. We'll save that. Let's give this some quick styling. So let's do like text 4XL font bold, and then we'll save that. I'm not sure why my auto completions aren't working today, but font bold. Cool. Let's go ahead and copy that 3 more times. So copy the li, not the a tag. I'm gonna do that 3 more times. So we'll do link 2 and then link 3. Cool. On the UL, let's give this a class name of space y5 just to add some vertical spacing between our links. And then on the top level div where our background is defined, let's give this a space y of 10. And then let's also give it a padding as well. So padding of about, I don't know, like let's say 6. And then we'll give it a container as well in an MX Auto, just so we have our content centered if we're on a larger screen. So at the very bottom with this div, let's just mock up some like really quick social media buttons. So again, another UL, li, and then let's just do a we'll just do a div, not an a tag. Class name W10 H10 rounded LG BG gray 500. It's too dark. Let's do BG gray 300. Cool. So that'll just be like a placeholder social media icon. Let's go ahead and copy this guy 3 more times. Save that. And then in this UL, we'll go with a class of flex item center gap x5. And then we will justify that to the center as well, just like that. Cool. One last thing. Let's go ahead and just center everything in our mobile nav bar. So at the very top div, where we have our background. Let's give this a flex call, and then justify center items center. And then we'll save that, and that will just center everything for our mobile nav bar. Let's actually not center it horizontally. Let's just only center it vertically. So to do that, let's just get rid of justify center here. And then, oh, I'm sorry, not justify center. Let's get rid of item center. Forgot that we were in a flex call, and we'll save that. Cool. So that'll be our working mobile nav bar. So let's go ahead and refresh the page real quick. And then let's, oh, we didn't add any logic to conditionally render this in. All right, let's do that first real quick then. So we only want this stuff to show up when mobile navbar is true. So to do that, let's create a conditional operator right here, and then we'll go with mobile nav and we will copy all of this logic, or sorry, all of this markup into that conditional statement. Save that. Cool. So now if we click on the button up here, we can see that the nav bar pops into place. However, there is a glaring problem here. We don't have a button to leave the nav bar. So how do we fix that? It's actually really straightforward. All we need to do is just go to our motion button component, specifically the div up here. I just want to make sure that's the right one. Yep. So in this div, all we need to do is give this a class name of relative and then z10. And what that's going to do is move the Z index of that button to be on top of the mobile navbar background. And the reason why this works is because technically the button and the mobile navbar are within the same, they're in the same wrapper div up here, or I'm sorry, the same navbar. They're siblings of one another, right? So when we change the stacking context or the Z index of one sibling, it'll show up on top of its other siblings if the other sibling has a fixed or an absolute or any other different position in CSS. So that's why this small little trick works to put that button on top. All right, so now that we have the button there, we can actually open and close our nav bar. But you'll notice one small glaring issue here. It's the fact that when we open and close the nav bar, it still pops into place and pops out of place. And that's not really surprising. We don't have any animations defined, and we're literally mounting and unmounting this component via this Boolean expression right here. So let's go ahead and add some animations and actually make this work as a animated mobile navbar. So to do that, let's go ahead and get rid of the div and replace that with a motion div. And then don't forget to replace that at the bottom as well, motion.div. And then all we need to do is just add some animations to this motion div. So the way that we'll do that is using, we'll use variants again to do this. Let's define two variants. We'll define an open state and a closed state as well. Now, in our closed state, we actually just want this to sort of close out to the left. So to do that, we'll just set our X to minus 100%. So in framer motion, we have shorthands for transformations. So this X minus 100%, minus 100%, basically is the same as saying translate X minus 100%. So that's just a shorthand that we have in framer motion. There are others for different directions, and there are others for different types of animations as well. So I would defer to the docs just to see what they have there. But yeah, so X minus 100%, we'll move it to the left by 100%. Cool. And then when it's open, we want it to be X 0%. That means just don't move it at all. Keep it where it was, as if it weren't animated at all. Cool. So we have these two variant states. Now, if we play the animation, we can see that it doesn't actually play anything. And the reason for that is because we never actually used these variant states. They're sort of just defined as part of the component, but they're not really being called on just yet. So to call these animation states, what we need to do is use an animate prop, and then we can refer to the open state in here as a string. Now, again, if we open and close this navbar, nothing is going to play. The reason why that happens is because the open state is essentially the exact same state as when the component mounts, right? The component by itself doesn't move, and the open state has an X of 0%, which means don't move at all. So that's why when we open and close it, it doesn't actually play an opening animation like what we would expect. What we need to have happen is have the component start in the closed state and then move to the open state. And the way that we can do that, GitHub Copilot just spoiled that for me, but we can use something called an initial prop to sort of set a component to a particular variant state before its animation plays. So that's what initial is doing for us. So now when we go ahead and open this nav bar, you can see that it opens from the left and goes to the right, just like that. Now, again, this we'll fix the transition state here, but one problem that I want to point out right now is that this animates in the open direction, but it doesn't animate in the closed direction. And the reason for that is because, again, we are using this Boolean expression that mounts and unmounts the component. When the component mounts, it starts in the initial state and then it animates to the open state, except when it unmounts, it doesn't have a state to go back to. It just sort of pops off the page. So to fix this, we actually need to use a third import from Framer Motion, and I referenced this earlier in the video, but we need that third import, and that's going to be animate presence. So animate presence is a component that helps us do exactly what we're trying to do with unmounting and animating and unmount. It essentially listens for when a motion child is going to leave the page, and it'll play a particular animation before that component actually unmounts. So to make this work, what we need to do is wrap the conditional statement in an animate presence. And then all we need to do is define a few more props for this to work. So let's put that animate presence below the curly bracket there. And then on the motion div, all we need to define is an exit prop. And exit is basically the opposite of animate. What it does is it'll play a variant animation as the component is unmounting from the page. And obviously, we want the closed state to be playing when the component is leaving the page. All right, let's give this a quick refresh. And now we can see that when we open the navbar, it'll open in the forward direction, and then it'll close out in the reverse direction as well, thanks to animate presence. All right, just one really quick thing that I want to mention. So I don't know if the Framer docs mentioned this at all, but when I got started with Framer Motion a few years ago, you needed to have a key in order for animate presence to work as intended. Now, I checked the docs like a week or two ago, and it does mention this key, but I don't know if it's required or not anymore for this animate presence to work. But just for now, I'm gonna just add a quick key here called mobile nav. Just in case we still need that key or not. Again, I don't know if it's actually necessary. If you guys know, or if anyone on the Framer team is watching this video, just let me know in the comments if this is something that we still need to do, because I actively do this on all of my projects still. Just because back in the day, that's like something that I learned when I first picked up Framer Motion. All right, cool. With that out of the way, we now have a animated mobile navbar that opens up and closes. So let's take this a step further and animate the actual children elements of the navbar. So the links, this white bar, and then these 3 social media mockups. Okay, so animating children in Framer Motion is super, super nice. It's way better than GSAP and anim.js, and it's all thanks to the way that Framer Motion has structured its transition prop. So this is way simpler than you probably think it will be. All we need to do is just give each of the children elements in our motion div. We need to convert them to motion components, obviously. So this motion, or this div, can be turned into a motion div. Don't forget to change that down there. Motion div. Let's see. This div right here can be a motion div as well. And then this last div also motion.div. Sort of losing my my voice here. Again, it's like, what time is it? It's like almost 1 a.m. Anyways, so we're almost done with the tutorial. Let's go ahead and head up here to, well, actually, before we do that, let's go ahead and define some variant states in our children. So remember that when you are a child of a Framer Motion parent, and if your parent has an animate and an initial prop, and it defines a variant state like closed and open, that variant state, those states are available to you as a child of that parent element. That wasn't really said that well, but basically, children motion components can inherit their parents' variant states. So in our motion div down here, what we need to do is just define a variance prop. And then in here, we'll have a open state and a closed state. And in our closed state, let's have it hide a little bit so that when it's in the open state, it kind of pops up into view. So to do that, let's give this a Y of 25% and an opacity of 0. And then in our open state, we just want to have a Y of 0% and an opacity of 1. And we'll save that. Cool. Let's apply that same effect to all of our children. So we'll apply that to the white line right here. And then we'll also apply that to the 3 social media icons over here. We'll go ahead and save that. Cool. So now if we refresh the page, we run the animation, you can kind of see that like it did play the animation. Let me run that again. But the issue is that the children's animations, they run immediately as soon as you open the nav bar. So it kind of runs in tandem and you kind of miss it if you're not really paying attention to it. So what we want to have happen is play the navbar's intro first and then animate the children onto the navbar. And then in the reverse direction, we want the children to leave first, and then we want the blue background, the navbar, to animate out of the page. All right, so to do that, it's actually really, really simple. And I was talking about this earlier. All we need to do is modify the transition prop to do this. So in Framer Motion, we have something called a transition prop, and this is the key that sort of defines like how animations will play, how long they go for, what their easing is, all of that good stuff. And within transition, we also have the ability to modify children animations. And again, GitHub Copilot is spoiling this a little bit, but we have access to a prop called stagger children. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The key that we want in here though is when. So the when key is going to basically determine when an animation gets played. So in this case, when I say when before children, what that means is play this motion divs, the nav bars animations, play that before the children animations start. So what this means for us is it'll play this open state, this open variant before these children will animate and play their animations. So to see what that looks like, let's go ahead and refresh the page, and then we'll go ahead and open the nav bar. You can see that the nav bar opened first, and then the children animations played after that. So that's exactly what we wanted. Now, if we close the nav bar, we're not going to see the children animate out. And the reason is because we need to include a transition in the reverse direction as well. So let's go ahead and copy that and put it down here. And we want to change this when to after children. And so what this means is it's going to play its closed state. The nav bar is going to leave the page after the children have played their animations. So we can now demo this. So if we open the nav bar, it opens up as expected, and if we close it, it now closes as expected as well. And the children animations will play after the nav bar has opened, and then it'll play initially, and then the nav bar will close after that. Cool. So we're almost done. The last thing that we need to do is just fix some of the jank with the transitions. So you'll notice that every time I open and close the navbar, it kind of like bounces into view and then bounces out of view. That's just the default tail or the default Framer Motion like easing. And we want to fix that. We want to make it a little bit more smooth and a little bit more mellow. So to do that easily, what we can do is use something called a motion config component, which we can import from Framer Motion. Motion config is a very basic component. All it does is it wraps all of your motion components, and it lets you define a transition that's common to all of your motion components. So to do that, let's go ahead and wrap this motion div in a motion config. And then we'll go down to this div right here. We'll save that. And then in our motion config, all we need to do is just pass it a transition prop. And then in here, we can define a custom transition that'll apply to all of the motion children within this motion config component. So what we want to have happen is change the type to spring. So in Framer Motion, we have different like transition types. There's linear, there's tween, there's spring, there's inertia, and then there's some others that I'm kind of forgetting right now. But they sort of all have their own unique quirks and whatnot, and they let you sort of play around with how things get animated. And it's really cool. I encourage you to check out the docs if you're interested in seeing how different types sort of apply and work in Framer Motion. So we're gonna use a spring. Spring kind of it kind of emulates an actual literal spring using like physics to do the animations and stuff. It can get really complex really quickly with like stiffness and like mass and all of that. We're not going to deal with that today. All we're going to do is just give it a bounce of 0.25, and then we'll give it a well, actually let's leave it at 0.25 for now. So this bounce prop right here, basically what all that does is it defines how bouncy you want your animation to be, whether If it's 0, that means literally no bounce. If it's 1, that means like infinite bounce. We kind of just want it to be in the middle, or not really in the middle, sorry, but like on the lower end of like low to no bouncing. So 0.25, we'll play around with that and see what that looks like. Let's go ahead and save that and let's run our animation. Cool. So you can see that the bounce animation applied to our children components. Like you can see that that was much more smoother than the navbar opening and closing, but it didn't apply to our navbar. Now, the reason why it didn't apply to the navbar is because the navbar itself, it defines a transition within itself, and this transition overwrites whatever is in the motion config transition prop. So to fix this, all we're going to do is just copy what we have in here straight down into our two transition props in our motion div down here. Go ahead and save that, and now we will run the animation. So the animation is a lot slower, but we still see that it like kind of like, pops out of the page a little bit. So let's go ahead and fix that by just changing the bounce to like, I don't know, like a really small number. Let's say like 0.099. And then we'll do the same down here with 0.099. And again, you can play around with these values. You can increase this, you can decrease this. You don't have to use a spring in your project. Again, this is all about experimentation, but we can play around with these values. And now let's open the nav bar, and now let's close it. And there we go. That's essentially a fully animated mobile nav bar within Framer Motion. And yeah, you can add this to your projects. It'll just add a little bit more flair, a little bit more creativity, maybe improve the UX as well now that the mobile nav bar is animated and not just popping into view and then quickly popping out of view when it's closed. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Leave a like and a comment if you have any questions, and yeah, subscribe for more content. I am keen on making more tutorials in the future. Thanks. Really quick bonus content, guys. So before you go, one thing I wanted to mention really quickly is if you open the navbar and then you go to like a tablet view or maybe even a desktop view, you'll notice that the navbar kind of like stays in place. It doesn't actually close out. So to fix this, all we can do is actually just add a hidden to the navbar. So to do that, on the motion div down here, all we need to do is add a MD or an LG hidden, and that will hide the nav bar when the page gets bigger. Now, obviously, you need to add more classes and more stuff to get rid of that X icon, but this LG hidden down here will keep the nav bar technically closed on large screen devices. Now, if you go back to a mobile device, it'll pop back up into place just like that. But that's just how you hide it in the event that a user goes from like a small screen to a large screen. All right, yeah, that's about it. See ya.